This is Northern Light for Monday, July 27th. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Catherine Wheeler. The missing piece of a cannon that exploded during an early battle of the Revolutionary War was brought out of Lake Champlain last week. For local historians and divers, the moment was almost 3 decades in the making.
When I, found out just how personal and just how tragic it was for this particular family, I felt obligated to follow this through.
Also on the show, a new lawsuit is challenging New York's medical aid in dying law.
Consistent with the Constitution, the best of our traditions, the government cannot go in and tell people how to die.
Our Albany reporters break down the lawsuit and the latest news from Albany.
And all this week, we're pulling back the curtain at NCPR. This morning, we'll have a conversation with station manager Mitch Teich about how NCPR is faring amid the end of federal funding for public media.
All that's coming up on Northern Light. Stick with us. Support for Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio comes from the View Restaurant at Mirror Lake in Lake Placid. Contemporary American cuisine, handcrafted cocktails, and select wines served with views of Mirror Lake and the High Peaks. MirrorLakeInn.com/dining. And from AJA Architecture and Planning in Glens Falls, providing architecture, planning, and interior design services for residential, commercial, and community spaces throughout the North Country. AJAarchitecture.com. This is Northern Light. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Catherine Wheeler. A healthcare network that runs 2 hospitals in the North Country is in a state of emergency. The North Star Health Alliance filed for bankruptcy earlier this year. New York State had to loan North Star $60 million to keep its hospitals in Ogdensburg and Carthage running. Now, North Star is hoping a partnership with another regional group could bring some stability. But as Richard Haller reports, it's unclear if that partnership will actually happen.
Last week, North Star announced in a press release that it's partnering with Rochester Regional Health, which has a network of 9 hospitals, including Canton-Potsdam, Messina, and Gouverneur in St. Lawrence County. But Rochester Regional Health says it hasn't entered into a binding agreement with North Star. What it did say is that it's having a continued conversation with the Department of Health and North Star's leadership about the possibility of a future relationship.
Sum it all up, Rochester Regional has been identified as the preferred partnership, and that takes it to the next steps.
That's Assemblyman Scott Gray. In a statement on Friday, North Star says its announcement on a partnership with Rochester Regional Health was issued earlier than intended, and that any future partnership is subject to due diligence and governance approvals. If a partnership is finalized between them, Gray says there are some upsides and concerns.
And that is potentially the lack of diversity from providers, right? That is a concern, and that needs to be addressed.
The worry is that a partnership could create a monopoly of local healthcare providers. Gray says on the flip side, this partnership could help provide area clinics throughout St. Lawrence and Jefferson counties.
Because, we all know the difficulty in traveling. Some people may be one-car households. We may have elderly people in the wintertime that can't travel. So those area clinics are critical to providing accessible health care.
North Star also just announced that it submitted plans to the Department of Health to close its labor and delivery services at its Claxton Hepburn Hospital in Ogdensburg, meaning expecting mothers would have to drive close to an hour away to give birth. North Star has public hearings scheduled this week in Carthage and Ogdensburg to let people evaluate its decisions to cut labor and delivery. Richard Haller, North Country Public Radio.
14 U.S. citizens were quarantined at Fort Drum after returning from a travel-restricted country. According to Reuters, the travelers flew back to Canada from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's an Ebola outbreak. They tried to cross from Canada to Vermont, but were stopped by border officials. They were then transported to Fort Drum and quarantined in apartment-style housing. Officials with the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention monitored them for Ebola. They determined they weren't infected. The travelers left Fort Drum on Monday. A do-not board order was issued this month and requires U.S. citizens in Congo to quarantine for at least 21 days before returning by plane.
A piece of local Revolutionary War history was raised from Lake Champlain last week, part of a cannon that fired rounds during the Battle of Valcour Island in 1776. It completes an artifact discovered more than 25 years ago. Kara Chapman was there and has our story.
Ed Scollin was a New York State Police trooper and diver back in 1999. His son, Sean, remembers a voicemail he left after a dive in Lake Champlain's Valcour Bay.
My mom pressed play, and it was like, he's like, I'm pretty sure I found a cannon. And I remember telling my mom, I bet it's just an old pipe or something.
It was a cannon, the biggest piece of one that had exploded on the American gunboat New York during the Battle of Valcour Island back in October of 1776. More than 200 years later, Ed Scollin's discovery of the cannon set off an 8-year archaeological survey of the Valcour battle site in the early 2000s. It yielded scores of other battle artifacts and most of the rest of the cannon. For 27 years after that first fragment was found, the final piece remained buried under 4 feet of clay on the lake bottom, until now.
1, go ahead, 2, 3, 4, yeah!
Footage captured by local videographer Paul Frederick shows Ed Scollin and others hoisting the last cannon piece out of the lake and onto the deck of a pontoon. They bring it to the Peru boat launch, where a crowd of local residents, historians, and reporters are waiting to see it. They put it in a hard-shell case and wheel it up to a small monument commemorating the battle. Everyone's excited, but Scollin still has one last test to make sure that this is indeed that missing piece of the cannon. He holds up a 3D replica of what's supposed to be an adjacent portion.
If this lines up to this, we got 100%.
Shall we?
And I think we do, yeah. I'm going to need some help.
The cannon piece is heavy, somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds. 3 people bend down to lift up one end as Scollin lines up the replica. The jagged edges fit together perfectly.
What do you think?
While Scollin found the first big piece of the cannon by accident, the hunt for this last piece was intentional. A couple summers ago, a team led by Texas A&M archaeologists started surveying Valcour Bay. Last year, they brought in a remote sensing specialist whose magnetometer found something that hadn't been picked up by previous divers' metal detectors. After some delays, the Texas A&M team returned this summer to retrieve the fragment. That took some elbow grease. Grad students Ethan Whiten from East Carolina University and Sean Crowley from Texas A&M did a lot of the digging. Crowley says that involved kicking down almost vertically into the clay and removing it by hand, one clump at a time.
And you couldn't see anything, so it was like, I think there's archaeology by feel or by grail is kind of what it is. So like you're completely blind, but you can feel where the cannon is. And so you're clearing out just the mud around it, kind of taking it out in chunks, then popping it out and kind of pushing it back out and just going and going.
Whiten says they had to be careful about how they dug.
The cannon was sitting at an angle, so in order to make sure that it didn't continue sinking further to the point where we couldn't raise it, we were instructed not to dig underneath it out of fear that it would keep sinking. So we dug the top of it. We dug enough of it off so we could get a strap around it and then pull it up with a lift pad.
Divers placed the cannon piece on a pallet to prevent it from sinking back into the mud, then rigged it with straps so it could head to the surface for the first time in almost 250 years. Christopher Dostal leads the Center for Maritime Archaeology and Conservation at Texas A&M. He says while the lake bottom's cold temperatures and low visibility aren't the best conditions for diving, those things were good for the artifact.
Preservation is unbelievable up here. You got cold, dark, anoxic clay. It's like things like this just don't happen.
The plan is for the fragment to reunite with its fellow cannon pieces at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum in Vergennes, Vermont, the approved repository for naval artifacts found in the lake. But it still has to undergo some work. Dostal says there's evidence of salt-based corrosion from the 1700s, before the cannon fell into Lake Champlain.
And so what we'll do is we'll run it through a process called electrolysis, and this will consolidate any corrosion materials we have, drive any residual salts out, and that'll put it in a nice passive state, and it should stay for the next 250 years.
Today is a celebration, but hanging over it all are the lives impacted by the battle and the cannon's explosion. According to historical records, the blast wounded Sergeant Jonas Holden and killed Lieutenant Thomas Rogers, both patriots from Westford, Massachusetts. Rogers' wife, Molly, was pregnant when she got the news that Rogers had died in the Battle of Valcour Island. On a small memorial stone in a Westford cemetery, it's inscribed that he died, quote, in the service of his country and in the cause of liberty. Scollin says he knew he'd found something important when he first found the cannon.
But then when I, found out just how personal and just how tragic it was for this particular family, I felt obligated to follow this through.
And now it's inspiring the next generation. Scollin's granddaughter, Sylvia, says it's cool that the final piece of the cannon has been found.
It's a new part of history that has been uncovered for more people to learn about.
Sylvia says she loves snorkeling and swimming, but doesn't plan to scuba dive like her grandfather. As for those who do, Ed Scollin has some advice for people who come across historical artifacts. Leave them there and leave recovery to the professionals.
I understand it. You find something really cool on the bottom, you're like, wow. And you feel connected to it because now you're part of its history. It's been lost and you found it and you want to protect it. But if you take it and it's involved in a bigger story, a bigger picture, you're removing a piece of the puzzle and you're removing an ability to interpret why it's there.
Historians and archaeologists say countless artifacts lie among the hundreds of shipwrecks that rest on the bottom of Lake Champlain. Each holds its own story in the puzzle of history. Kara Chapman, North Country Public Radio, on the shores of Lake Champlain in Peru.
This is NCPR.
You're listening to Northern Light, only here on North Country Public Radio. It's 8:13. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Catherine Wheeler. Stick around. NCPR station manager Mitch Teich is in the studio for a conversation about the station's financial outlook.
That's coming up in just a few minutes here on Northern Light. First, we'll hear a little bit more music from Pat Johnson out of Athens, Ontario. Northern Light comes from organizations, arts organizations, and businesses throughout our community, including the Adirondack Experience, the museum on Blue Mountain Lake, presenting natural beauty, the art of rustic furniture, a temporary exhibit currently on display, the adkx.org. And from the Adirondack Artists Guild on Main Street in Saranac Lake, a gallery of 15 local artists bringing fine art to the Adirondacks for over a quarter century. Adirondackartistguild.com.
A new lawsuit is challenging New York's medical aid in dying law before it takes effect in August. New York Public News Network reporters Jimmy Vielkind and Samuel King break down the lawsuit and other news from the Capitol.
Hi, Samuel.
Hi, Jimmy.
Samuel, you reported on some last-minute legal challenges to New York's medical aid in dying law. What are they all about?
Well, the latest suit is from a coalition of Catholic health providers, nursing homes, and nuns, as well as the Diocese of Rockville Center on Long Island. They say even though religious organizations can opt out of medical aid in dying, they would still have to advise patients of their options. Attorneys argue that violates their First Amendment rights. Here's Adele Keim, a senior counsel with the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, the attorneys for the plaintiffs.
consistent with the Constitution, the best of our traditions, the government cannot go in and tell people how to die.
They're seeking a temporary injunction to keep the law from taking effect on August 5th. A judge rejected a similar request from a group of disability rights groups. Their lawsuit, though, is still pending.
So this means that the law is going to take effect.
The governor's office tells me it's full speed ahead, Jimmy, and the Department of Health is working to implement the law, quote, thoroughly and responsibly. Veronica Darling is the director of litigation for the nonprofit Compassion and Choices. The group lobbied heavily for Governor Hochul to sign the aid in dying legislation, and she says the state's response is a relief.
It means they can focus on living their lives and spending times with their family and not worrying about having to rework their end-of-life plan.
Okay, we'll see if any judges act in these final days.
And Jimmy, you were recently at a rally for Governor Hochul, and it made you wonder just how powerful organized labor is right now.
Yeah, that's right. I visited a union hall for something that was put on by the state Democratic Party. Hochul allies bashed her Republican opponent, Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman, and two of the speakers were labor leaders. But I was thinking about recent losses by labor-backed candidates in New York City, and even how a lot of union members have supported President Trump, even though their leaders have endorsed Democratic candidates.
Yeah, both Adriano Espaillat and Antonio Reynoso lost Democratic primaries this year to candidates backed by the Democratic Socialists of America. That group is showing a lot of organizing might.
That's how I posed the question to Mark Emanation. He's the Capital District Area Labor Federation's executive director. He says he knows that union members cross the political spectrum.
So what we want to do this year is to go talk to them at their doors and say, how's life treating you? What do you think we should do collectively to make this thing change?
Are Democrats worried?
They say no. Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, after all, won his statewide primary very easily with lots of labor support. And a spokesperson for Hochul's campaign says she's feeling confident.
There's news from the Garden State about voter fraud. New Jersey officials say a software glitch by an outside vendor led to around 400 non-citizens voting in the 2024 elections. The firm in question, Edemia, also has business in New York, Jimmy.
Republicans in the state legislature saw that, and they're calling for a hearing to examine the state's voter registration infrastructure. They note that the Department of Motor Vehicles in New York has Edemia contracts for software that lets people apply for driver's licenses and register themselves to vote at the same time. Assemblymember Matt Slater is a Westchester County Republican. He says he was surprised by the news from New Jersey.
I think that should give us reason to pause and reevaluate and recalibrate.
Is there any evidence of problems?
So far, no. The State Board of Elections says it has a different registration process than New Jersey. Applicants have to affirm multiple times that they're citizens in order to register to vote. And Democrats who control the state assembly haven't answered Slater's request for a hearing.
Okay, we'll see if that story has any legs. Talk soon, Jimmy.
Take care, Samuel.
That was New York Public News Network reporters Jimmy Vielkind and Samuel King.
A trial is underway in Essex County Court for a man who's accused of murdering his 9-year-old daughter in the Adirondacks last year. The New York Public News Network's Pat Bradley reports.
During opening statements, the prosecution painted Luciano Fratellin as a man continually changing his story as investigators discovered information that challenged his narrative, while his attorney said law enforcement decided his client's guilt before the investigation began. Prosecutors say GPS tracking of Luciano Fratellin and his daughter's phones placed them at the site where Melina's body was found. They say dirt on clothing worn earlier in the day by Luciano Fratellin cannot be differentiated from the soil at the marsh where Melina was found dead under a log with a rock on top. Defense attorneys contend that investigators ignored the pleas of a distraught father who saw his daughter kidnapped by 2 men in a white van. They add that all evidence in the case is circumstantial and there are no witnesses nor confessions to the crime. The trial is expected to last 2 to 3 weeks. In Plattsburgh, I'm Pat Bradley for the New York Public News Network.
A 93-year-old man died last week in a UTV crash in St. Lawrence County. State police say Donald Sarasoli of Ogdensburg was operating a UTV on a private driveway in Morristown when he ran a curve and struck a large rock. He was thrown from his vehicle after it overturned down an embankment. Sarasoli was pronounced dead after local emergency responders arrived at the scene to provide life-saving measures.
And in local baseball, the North Country Thunderbirds beat the Saranac Surge in 2 of their 3 games over the weekend, and the Malone Border Hounds won their series against the Tupper Lake River Pigs. The teams are off today. The Malone Border Hounds play the Saranac Surge at home tomorrow. First pitch is at 5 o'clock. And the River Pigs face the Thunderbirds at 7 at Racket Pond Stadium in Tupper Lake. This is NCPR. You're listening to Northern Light here on North Country Public Radio. It's almost 8:22. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Catherine Wheeler. Stick around after the show for Bird Note coming up at 8:42. With our eyes to the skies, sunset in Canton is at 8:32 tonight, and the moon, if you look up, is a waxing gibbous at 96% of full.
Scattered showers and thunderstorms are expected this afternoon, mainly across the Adirondacks. There could be some heavy downpours at times, too. Highs expected to reach into the upper 70s, almost to 80 degrees in the valleys today. Showers and thunderstorms are expected to be more widespread as we head into the middle of the week. At last check, it was 69 degrees in Fort Drum, 64 in Saranac Lake, 71 degrees in Plattsburgh, and 20 degrees in Gananoque.
It's been a year since Congress ended federal funding for public media, television, and radio stations. North Country Public Radio lost $670,000 that Congress had already appropriated to support our programming and staff. Last summer, our community stepped up, raising the money we needed to fill in the gap for the next 2 years.
But we're in a new normal now. Federal funding is not coming back. We're in the middle of our summer fundraiser to raise that money to keep this public radio station strong for the long term. You can make a contribution at ncpr.org/give. We want to be transparent about how we spend that money and how it drives what you hear on the radio and see on social media and our website. So all this week, we're pulling back the curtain and talking with the people who make this station what it is. This morning, we're joined by NCPR's General Manager, Mitch Teich. Good morning, Mitch.
Good morning, Monica.
So can you give listeners an update on NCPR's finances? How are we doing since Congress pulled back that federal funding?
Well, you and Catherine kind of answered the question a little bit in your intro. It's kind of a two-part answer. Immediately, we're doing all right, actually, because as you so eloquently put it, people stepped up when we lost our federal funding last summer. We sounded the alarm, and people understood what we were facing. And so we raised a lot of money in the past fiscal year, much more than we would have in what you would call a normal year, if there are any normal years anymore. But the real question for us, and the reason that we're doing this fundraiser, is how we will do going forward, because that gap that we talk about, what comes out to about $335,000 a year, which we had been receiving, that gap doesn't go away at the end of that 2-year cycle. It just keeps going. And so we're looking for ways to permanently fill that gap in. And one of the ways is by raising the baseline. And, the baseline is the amount of money we would raise in what is now the new normal year.
Yeah, NCPR has always relied on donors and the community to support us. But how is that fundraising strategy different now that we've lost, more than $330,000 a year in federal funding?
Well, there's relying on, and then there is relying on with a capital R. The strategy hasn't changed entirely because we have always talked about how NCPR is by the community and of the community, but really that rings more true than ever. And so where in some years we might have been able to say, okay, look, the numbers are down a little bit in terms of individual donors or underwriting, but fortunately we still have our federal funds to fall back on. We don't have that anymore, and so the strategy has to be that we need to do everything that we can to make sure that people continue to support us and also pursue other means of funding, whether it's grants from foundations or what have you. But really, we're just intensifying our efforts to be connected to the community.
Well, we've heard reports that many stations are struggling to stick around without their federal funding. Last week, NPR's public editor wrote in a column that, quote, public media is still trying to figure out its future. Does that ring true to you?
Yes and no. There are some stations that really faced some existential issues when that federal funding went away. These are stations that got 40, 50, 60, even 75% of their annual budget from federal funds. And there have been a number of sources that have sprung up to help those stations bridge the gap. But one of the things that did was kind of kick the can down the road a little bit. It said, okay, we're going to provide you with some bridge funding. It's called the Public Media Bridge Fund for a couple of years to give you a chance to figure that out. And so there are lots of stations that are still trying to figure that out. But in some ways, stations like ours, again, we lost about 12% of our federal funds. And we would have been crazy not to have been thinking about these things already. And for years, what would happen if our federal funds went away? So I don't think figuring out our future is a new thing in this business.
Yeah, I think, we mentioned that these stations are struggling and they're having to deal with those consequences. And many are laying off staff or reducing services to stay afloat. But over the last year, NCPR is actually expanding. We've added a few people to our staff and are repositioning a reporting job to be based in Glens Falls. And how is it possible the station can grow at a time when we're also adapting to budget challenges?
Magic, alchemy. No, it is. It's because we've grown very intentionally, and I think with a lot of thought about doing things sustainably at NCPR for a long time. And so we have never grown so far out in front of ourselves that we couldn't support it. And I think the jobs that you're talking about now are also done with that in mind. We are growing in a very strategic way and a way that allows us to support the positions without putting them at risk. We never want to be in a position where, last hired, first fired, right? Where we grow and then 3 years later we can't support that position and that position goes away. And so the things that we're doing are all done with the intention of better serving the North Country and also better being able to support the positions that we're creating, which is why we have a new person in our development department, but also we're bringing this person on in Glens Falls and we'll be in a better position to serve the entire region.
And you've touched on it already, but is there anything that makes NCPR's situation distinctive versus other stations around the country?
NCPR is, I think, in a really good situation in one way, and that is that the stations across New York State have grown closer together since these challenges have cropped up. And while we've lost federal funding, the stations around the state, especially the radio-only stations like ours, WAMC in Albany, WNYC in New York City, stations in Oswego and Syracuse, we've worked really closely together to talk about strategy so that all of our stations are strong. We have had really good relationships with the New York State legislature that has helped out in sort of backfilling some of what we have lost. And so I think, where some stations are constantly at odds with the states, the state legislatures in those states that they serve, we have been better off than some. And I have every reason to continue to think that we're going to continue working well together.
NCPR's station manager, Mitch Teich, joining us this morning to talk about the station's financial situation during our summer fundraiser. Mitch, thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
Well, and Mitch, you also actually wear a couple of hats around here, including music host extraordinaire, guest host from time to time. You can tune in this afternoon from 3 to 5 to hear Mitch host NCPR's Summer Monday Mix. He's put together a special edition of Mitch's Shuffle Mode, including a new cover of Fleetwood Mac's Dreams and a song by a 1970s Hungarian band that sounds exactly like ABBA. And you can explore the depths of Mitch's playlist this afternoon from 3 to 5 on NCPR's Summer Monday Mix. We're actually going to go out on a little bit of music that you provided for us to preview it. Can you set it up for us?
Yeah, so this is a band from Michigan called Racing Mount Pleasant, which is interesting because they take their name from a highway sign in Wisconsin that actually says Racine Mount Pleasant on Interstate 94. It's a track called Reichenbach Falls, and it's a cool little song.
Excuse me, I apologize. I was only playing a preview. Let's listen to the whole song. Well, maybe we won't get a chance.
It's a good song. You'll hear the whole song this afternoon between 3 and 5.
That'll be just terrific. We are looking forward to it. Mitch, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning and for talking through the station's financial situation as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who has made a contribution.
You can do so right now at ncpr.org/give.
That's the show. Stick around for more news from NPR just ahead.
Then later this morning, after that, join us for Marketplace Morning Report, where you'll get caught up on all the morning's business news starting at 8:51. Host Kimberly Adams will be speaking to Mark Levine, New York City's controller. They'll talk about the state of affordable housing in the city and what other big metro areas can learn from the Big Apple. It's coming up from 8:51 to 9 o'clock right here on NCPR. Support for this program comes from Brookfield Renewable NA, a provider of clean, renewable, and locally sourced hydropower, reminding listeners to please use caution when recreating near hydroelectric dams, as water conditions can change quickly. And from the Northern New York Community Foundation, serving Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence counties since 1929, helping donors fulfill their charitable giving goals to forever strengthen the places they love. Online at nnycf.org. That's it for the show. I'm Monica Sandreski.
And I'm Catherine Wheeler. Be well.